When my mother-in-law passed away, everything seemed suspended in grief. The house felt too still, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I had volunteered to help clean out her room because, honestly, I thought it might be therapeutic. My husband couldn't face it, and I understood. He had always been close to her, and their bond had been complicated. Or maybe it was just something I never fully understood. She was a meticulous woman, the type who labeled her spices and folded fitted sheets like a professional. Every drawer had its own order, every box a purpose. So when I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of her bed and saw a plain manila folder tied with twine, something inside me tensed. It was too ordinary to be sentimental, too hidden to be unimportant. There was no label, just a thin layer of dust and a piece of folded paper taped on top. I don't know why, but I froze. The tape had yellowed, curled at the edges. Written in her sharp, slanted script were 6 words that made my breath hitch. For your eyes, if I've failed. I stared at it, my pulse rising. Failed? Failed what? I told myself I was just being dramatic, that maybe it was a letter to her son, or an old will she'd forgotten to destroy. But my fingers moved before my conscience could stop them. I untied the twine. I opened the folder. Inside was a leather-bound diary. Old, heavy, worn at the edges, like it had been reread many times. There was also a flash drive taped to the inside of the folder, and a single photograph tucked between the pages of the diary. The photograph was of me, standing in her kitchen, smiling awkwardly. I remembered that moment. It was the first Thanksgiving I ever spent with her family. She had asked to take my picture. I thought it was sweet. I never imagined she would keep it like this, alone, tucked in a folder that was never meant to be found. I opened the diary. The first entry was dated almost a decade ago, a week before I first met her. Her name is Emily. He says he loves her, but love is rarely enough. We'll see. That sentence felt like a slap. I flipped ahead, desperate, my fingers shaking. She's polite. She's clever. She's playing a long game. I can see it in her eyes. I wonder if she realizes I'm playing one too. I snapped the book shut. My mouth went dry. My heart thudded so loud I was certain it echoed off the hardwood floors. What was this? What game? Why did she write about me like I was some stranger she needed to outwit? I should have stopped reading. I should have walked away, burned the folder, buried it with her name and her secrets. But I didn't. Because deep down, something in me already knew. This wasn't a diary. It was a weapon. And she had written every word with surgical precision, as if she were building something that could outlive her. A trap, a map, a confession. I didn't know yet. But I was going to read every page. Even if it changed everything. Even if it meant I would never see my husband or our marriage the same way again. Even if it proved she had always been watching. Even if it ended with a sentence I wasn't meant to read. Because when I opened that folder, I opened a door I couldn't close. And behind it, something had been waiting. Before the diary, before the folder, before the note that rewired everything I believed my life was ordinary in the best way possible. Not glamorous, not dramatic, but solid, secure. Like a house built slowly, with 2 sets of hands and a shared blueprint. When I met Daniel, I wasn't looking for anything. That's always how the stories start, isn't it? I wasn't searching for love. I wasn't ready to settle down. I was just a woman in her mid-20s who liked her job, loved her dog, and thought brunch was a valid excuse to avoid real cooking on weekends. He was calm. That's what drew me in first, not charm or looks or any grand gesture. He had this quiet presence, this steady rhythm to how he moved through the world. It made you want to match his pace. We met at a mutual friend's wedding. He spilled wine on my dress. I should have been annoyed, but he offered me his cloth napkin and said, "I swear this wasn't my pickup line." I laughed. He didn't try too hard. He didn't have to. 6 months later, we moved in together. A year after that, we got engaged. It was quick by some standards, but nothing about it felt rushed. We made decisions together. We compromised. We fought fairly. When we disagreed, he listened, really listened. not the kind of silence that waits for its turn to speak. And when I met his mother, I remember thinking, she raised him. She must be incredible. She was poised, well-spoken, wore pearls even on casual Sundays. She didn't smile easily, but when she did, it felt like you had earned it. And maybe that's what I spent the next few years doing, earning her approval in quiet, subtle ways. I brought wine she liked. I helped in the kitchen without being asked. I never challenged her opinions, even when they were veiled criticisms wrapped in just looking out for you tones. I thought we had a good rhythm, not warm exactly, but respectful, like dance partners who never stepped on each other's toes. Daniel always said she was hard to read, but loyal to a fault. She doesn't say much, he'd warned me early on, but when she does, it matters. Looking back, I wonder what else she said, just not to me. Our wedding was beautiful. Not extravagant, but meaningful. She helped plan it. She offered to cover the cost of the florist and insisted on a live quartet instead of a DJ. Elegance never goes out of style, she told me, brushing invisible lint off her silk blouse. I nodded, not realizing then that what she meant was, this is my son's wedding, and therefore it must reflect me. She never overstepped. That was her gift. Everything was couched in suggestion. A hint, a gesture, a tone. Are you sure that's the dress you want? I heard that catering company is a little unreliable. Your family seems lovely. Do you think they'll feel overwhelmed by something more formal? Subtle erosion, one grain of sand at a time. But at the time, I thought she cared. I thought she wanted the day to be perfect. And it was, in many ways. I remember standing across from Daniel, watching his eyes water as I read my vows. I remember thinking, this man would never hurt me. This is the safest I have ever been. Our first year of marriage was quiet, but happy. We built routines, made plans, laughed. There were little traditions: Friday night takeout and terrible reality television, Sunday morning coffee walks, leaving sticky notes on the bathroom mirror. Every now and then, though, something small would shift. A conversation that ended too quickly. A dinner that felt tense without explanation. Daniel would mention his mom called, but never share what they talked about. And I didn't ask, because I trusted him. I trusted us. Now I realize, the strength of a marriage isn't just about how well two people love each other. It's also about how well they withstand everything and everyone that tries to interfere. I remember once early on I came home to find Daniel quiet, distant. I asked if something was wrong. He shook his head and said, just tired. But there was something else in his eyes, something guarded. I brushed it off. We all have bad days. I didn't know then that some silences carry weight, that some secrets wear masks made of normalcy. My mother always told me, when people want to control you, they don't always yell. Sometimes they smile. I didn't understand what she meant. Not until the diary. Not until I realized my marriage, my perfect, ordinary, beautiful marriage, was built on a stage where I wasn't the only one writing the script. She was there too, quietly directing from the wings. It's funny how hindsight sharpens everything. What once looked like noise suddenly arranges itself into melody. What seemed like isolated moments now pulse with connection. Like red strings drawn across a map, each pinned memory pointing toward a truth I didn't want to see. The first time I noticed something strange, it was small. Daniel came home late from work, not unusual, but when I asked how his meeting went, he blinked like he was trying to remember what lie he'd told himself to believe. He said, "Oh, it ran long. You know how she gets." She? He paused. My manager. It wasn't just the hesitation, it was the tone. Soft, almost rehearsed, like he was playing a character he hadn't fully committed to. I smiled and nodded, because that's what trust does. It fills in the blanks. It patches over cracks. It tells you not to ask again. That was the first pattern. The pauses. Then came the phone calls. Late at night, muffled voices in the hallway. His back turned as he said, "I'll handle it." Or, "Not now, she's here." I assumed he meant work deadlines, emergencies. He was a project manager. That came with stress, didn't it? But what project needed a whispered conversation at midnight, followed by silence and a blank stare? One time I walked into the room and saw him with his phone pressed to his chest, Screen down. I raised an eyebrow. He said, "Just work stuff. Boring." And again, I believed him. Because when someone has never given you a reason to doubt, you give them every excuse not to. Then there was the party. His coworker's birthday. He said it was just drinks with the team. I wasn't invited. It's mostly guys, babe. You'd hate it. So I stayed home, made popcorn, watched reruns. At midnight he texted, "Running late, don't wait up." He didn't come home until doi. Patruzeccia. Matris ever dot ends. His shirt was inside out. His breath didn't smell like alcohol, it smelled like perfume. Something sweet, musky, not mine. I didn't say anything. Not that night, not the next day. Instead, I washed his clothes, folded them, and convinced myself it must have been cologne from a hug. Maybe someone spilled their drink on him. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe marriage meant giving the benefit of the doubt even when the doubt starts screaming. That was the second pattern, the rationalizations. And then my favorite, the lies by omission. He stopped mentioning his mother. She used to come up in conversation weekly. Recipes she'd sent, things she'd said, little anecdotes from childhood. But somewhere around our third year of marriage, her name vanished from the dinner table. Not dramatically, not in anger, just absent. I asked once, "How's your mom doing?" He shrugged. "She's fine." Just that. No details. No warmth. Just fine. I let it go. Until one day I saw a message flash on his phone screen. Did she find it? I remember the words because they felt surgically designed to open a wound I didn't know I had. He quickly swiped it away, turned the screen off and said, "Spam." Spam doesn't ask if I've found something. Spam doesn't look like a contact saved under the name Evelyn M. His mother's name, I asked slowly. "Spam from your mom?" He didn't miss a beat. "It's not her, just someone with the same initials." I should have pushed harder. But fear is a powerful leash, and I was terrified of what pulling the thread might unravel. That was the third pattern, the evasions. Each on their own, they could be explained. People get busy. Phones glitch. Marriages go through lulls. But together, they formed a language I hadn't learned to speak yet, one of shadows and secrets, one where silence carried weight and eye contact meant surrender. There was a night right before her health began to decline, when I visited his mother alone. I brought soup, sat by her side, offered polite conversation. She looked at me, eyes sharper than her frail body suggested, and said, "You're still here." I laughed awkwardly. "Of course I am." She didn't blink. Most would have left by now. I didn't understand what she meant. Until later. Until I realized she didn't say it as a compliment. It wasn't admiration. It was surprise. Maybe disappointment. As if she had bet on my absence and was losing. There was always something about her that felt layered, calculated. She could wield politeness like a scalpel. Even her compliments felt like puzzles. "You look rested," she once told me, her tone tight. I suppose some women thrive when they don't work. I was working full-time, but not in her eyes, not compared to her standards. Daniel never defended me. He'd smile, offer a light joke, change the subject. I thought that was diplomacy. Now I think it was fear. He never wanted to be between us. He wanted to be untouched, neutral. But neutrality is a choice. And choosing not to pick a side is still picking one. I look back now and wonder how much of my life was performance. How many dinners I cooked trying to win a game I didn't know I was playing. How many compliments I tailored. How many smiles I polished. How many times I thought, if I just try harder, maybe she'll finally like me. But it wasn't about like. It was about control. And slowly, beneath the surface of birthdays and holidays and polite exchanges, something had been tightening around me. I didn't see it then. I didn't want to. Because sometimes, loving someone means ignoring what's right in front of you. Even when the evidence is dripping with intent. Even when the patterns stop being coincidences and start becoming truths. Even when your gut whispers, something isn't right. Especially when that whisper starts to sound like your own voice. The second time I opened the diary, it was past midnight. Daniel was asleep upstairs. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old floorboards and the low hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the dining table with a single lamp on, the diary in front of me like a confession waiting to be read aloud. I told myself I would only read one more page, just enough to satisfy the gnawing ache in my chest. But like hunger, the more I fed it, the deeper it grew. The first entry I opened was dated exactly 4 days after Daniel brought me home to meet her. She smiled at me too much. It wasn't genuine, too eager, too rehearsed. That kind of woman doesn't bend. She breaks when pushed. I reread the line 3 times, searching for something else, sarcasm, humor, affection. But it wasn't there. Just cold analysis. The next few pages unfolded like surveillance reports. Noticed she didn't ask about my work. Self-absorbed or nervous. We'll test further. Burned the roast. Tried to laugh it off. Daniel said it was fine. He's getting better at pretending. Each note chipped away at a version of myself I thought had existed. The woman I remembered young, hopeful, trying her best, was being reduced to a case study. Worse, there were patterns in her writing. She rated my behavior. Not just once or twice, but regularly. She kept scores. Dinner, 6/10. Outfit, 7.5. 10 inappropriate heels for a family setting. Emotional reaction, controlled. Potential for longevity, moderate. I turned the page. My hands were trembling. Tried to provoke minor jealousy by mentioning Daniel's ex. She smiled, but jaw tightened. Noted. Noted. Like I was some lab rat running a maze, unaware someone was tracking every turn. A week later, she had written, "Arranged lunch with old friend brought up career sacrifices." She asked if I regretted staying home with Daniel as a child. Tone. Too curious. Borderline. Intrusive. Threat level. Rising. Threat level. I was her daughter-in-law. I loved her son. I baked her birthday cakes. I smiled through backhanded compliments and kept her secrets about medications and blood pressure and all the small humiliations of aging. And she rated me like a competitor. The further I read, the darker it got. One entry mentioned Daniel directly. Spoke to him today about joint finances. Slipped in a suggestion that separate accounts may be safer. He didn't push back. Good. I felt like I had swallowed ice. The first year of our marriage, Daniel suddenly suggested we keep our personal savings separate. He framed it as financial responsibility. Just in case something happens, babe. Emergencies. I'd agreed. I'd even praised his foresight. Now I knew where the idea came from. She hadn't advised him. She had incepted him. But the part that made my blood truly run cold came 3 entries later. Planted idea of prenup too late. She already has emotional leverage. Next strategy. Isolation. Isolation. She wrote it like a battle plan. And it had worked. Slowly, subtly, people began to drift from our lives. Friends who said I was harder to reach these days. My sister, who once called every weekend, now barely texted. Even my mother seemed more distant, always respecting boundaries I never set. One night, I remembered Daniel had come home angry. "Your mom said she felt uncomfortable visiting. Said you made her feel small." I was stunned. What? She said you told her we didn't need advice on how to decorate the nursery. I hadn't. I remembered the conversation vividly. I'd said, "I appreciate the suggestions, but I want to try my own ideas first." I had even hugged her. Now I wondered who else had been reporting back. Who else had been noted? The diary wasn't just observations, it was manipulation. It was design. She hadn't watched our marriage unfold. She had engineered its stress points. I turned to an entry marked with a corner fold, clearly revisited. She cried today. Not sure if genuine. Claimed to feel overwhelmed by work and expectations. I asked if she wanted a break from Daniel. She didn't bite. But she's cracking. Cracking. Was that what she wanted? To watch me fracture under invisible pressure? To push and prod and pull until I snapped? What was the end game? I found the answer in a half-page note written in rushed handwriting. He deserves someone who fits. Someone who won't weigh him down with her ambitions and emotions and overanalysis. She performs well, but I see the edges fraying. Perform. Fraying. I wasn't a person to her. I was a role. One she didn't cast. And somewhere in all of this, somewhere in the tight lines and clipped sentences, there was a woman who believed she was protecting her son. But from what? From love? From partnership? From someone who didn't fit her blueprint? The entries continued for years. Every milestone, our anniversary, my promotion, his surgery was annotated, not celebrated. Sent flowers for her new job. No card. Want her to question where they came from. Asked Daniel if he's still happy. He said yes. Smiled too quickly. She wants children. Will stress Daniel's anxiety about fatherhood. He listens to me. Still, I closed the diary. My fingers ached from gripping the pages too hard. My throat was raw. It felt like I'd screamed, but no sound had come out. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a history rewritten. And as I sat there, staring at the cover of that leather-bound book, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until now. I had never truly been alone with my husband. His mother had always been in the room, her words in his ear, her thoughts behind his decisions, her diary under our foundation. And now, with every sentence I read, I felt the walls of our life shaking, not because they had cracks, but because someone had been hammering at the base since the beginning. There are moments when the body knows before the mind does. A chill crawls up your spine. A knot tightens in your gut. You don't have the facts yet, but your instincts are already screaming. That's what happened when I found the photograph. It had slipped from the diary when I flipped a page too quickly, landed on the floor like a discarded clue. I bent down to pick it up, expecting another image of me, another surveillance souvenir. But this one was different. It was a photo of two women sitting at a cafe. Their heads were tilted together, mid-laughter, coffees in hand. The table was cluttered with a pastry plate and a single red notebook. And there, across from my mother-in-law, sat Nora. I dropped the picture. Nora. The name hit like a slap. Nora, my old college roommate. My bridesmaid. The woman who'd once lived with me for an entire summer after a bad breakup. The one who had disappeared from my life just over 3 years ago with no warning. No text. No explanation. I stared at the photo, heart pounding. I hadn't thought of her in so long, not because I forgot, but because the wound had never closed properly. We'd been close. Not just party friends or class partners. She'd seen me cry. She knew my family. She held my veil at the wedding. And then, nothing. She ghosted me after a lunch we planned and never had. I texted. I called. I even emailed once, worried something had happened. She never responded. I asked Daniel about it once. She's probably just going through something, he said, unconcerned. People drift. But now I had photographic proof that Nora hadn't drifted. She'd redirected, right into my mother-in-law's orbit. I flipped the photo over. A date was written in ballpoint pen on the back. The 12th of April, 2019. 7 months before Nora vanished from my life. My hands went cold. That was the same week Daniel and I had our biggest fight. The kind that left us sleeping in separate rooms for 3 days. I'd always thought it started over something stupid, an argument about my work schedule and how I was too distracted lately. But what if it wasn't about that? What if it was planned? I tore back into the diary. The 10th of April. Lunch with Nora, promising. Knows her well. Will use her to confirm suspicions. She's more observant than I expected. The 13th of April. N says she noticed a shift in Emily's tone. More defensive, less affectionate. Maybe strain at work or guilt. The 17th of April. Planted idea with Daniel. Perhaps she's overwhelmed, not fully committed. He resisted, but not strongly. I covered my mouth with my hand. The nausea came in waves. Nora had reported on me. But why? What could she possibly gain? And then I saw it. The 25th of April. N asked if I'd ever imagined someone better for Daniel. I told her I had once, long ago. She smiled. That entry repeated in my head like a drumbeat. She smiled. I remembered something then, something I hadn't thought about in years. The time Nora and I went out for drinks during my engagement. She'd made a joke, half laughing, half serious. If you ever call off the wedding, just know I have a huge crush on Daniel. I'd wait the polite 2 weeks before texting him. I'd rolled my eyes. You're awful. She'd smirked. I'm honest. At the time, I thought it was just a joke. Now, Now, I wasn't so sure. I turned the page. May 3. She pulled back. Cut ties. Says it's for her own clarity, but I believe she's conflicted. She wanted this to go further. I told her patience is the greatest virtue. I stood up from the table. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd been on a ship too long. I pressed my palms to the wood, trying to steady my breathing. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It wasn't just controlling mother-in-law behavior. This was orchestration, a symphony of interference composed over years. And now, one of the instruments was someone I had once trusted implicitly. I sat back down. I had to know more. June vanked and moved away, claimed it was for a new job. I suspect she's distancing herself from what she didn't get. She was useful, but not essential. Useful, but not essential. That's how she saw people. That's how she saw me. I scanned ahead. Nora's name didn't appear again. Whatever role she had played was over. She'd been a phase, a strategy, and I'd been the collateral. There was a flash drive taped inside the back cover of the diary. I hadn't dared plug it in, but now I had to know what else had been archived. I went upstairs to my office, locked the door, and inserted the flash drive into my laptop. It was password protected. Of course it was. I tried the obvious first. Daniel, then Emily, then wedding, anniversary, even Nora. None of them worked. I almost gave up until I remembered something from one of the earliest entries. A phrase that stood out. Something about performance and scores. I typed, "She breaks when pushed." The screen flickered and opened. Inside were 4 folders, each one labeled with a year: 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. I opened 2019. Dozens of files, audio recordings, scanned documents, email screenshots, photos. I clicked on the first recording. Danielle's voice. I just feel like she's pulling away, like she's got this whole world I'm not part of anymore. Then her voice, his mother's. "Maybe you're sensing something real. Don't ignore it." I clicked the next file. A screenshot of an email from my work account to a male colleague. Innocent, professional. But the subject line was highlighted. After hours question. In the diary, she'd written, "She uses work as a shield, but perhaps also as a distraction. Daniel should be reminded of boundaries." I clicked another file. A scanned letter from Nora to my mother-in-law. "I don't know if this is helping anymore. I thought I was doing the right thing, but she's not who you think. She's not weak." Not weak. I stared at those words. Was that meant as a defense? Or a warning? I backed out of the folder, shut the laptop. My chest felt hollow. My head, a whirlpool of questions. The betrayal had layers. Not just from my mother-in-law. Not just from Daniel's silence, but from a friend I had once called family. And somewhere, buried beneath the rage and disbelief, was a growing certainty. I had no idea how deep this went, but I was going to find out. And when I did, I would not break. Not this time. Something shifted in me after the flash drive. Maybe it was the sound of Daniel's voice echoing doubts I never knew he carried. Maybe it was Nora's words, "She's not weak." Or maybe it was just the sheer volume of what I'd uncovered. Files, notes, timelines. A blueprint of my life, built not by love, but by strategy. Whatever it was, it hardened me. Not in a bitter, vengeful way, at least not yet. It was colder than that, quieter, like steel forged slowly in the dark. I spent the next 3 days pretending to be myself, smiling when I should, cooking dinner, laughing at his bad television shows, asking about work, all while I copied the contents of the flash drive to a hidden folder on my cloud account. While I scanned the diary page by page using an OCR app that turned handwriting into searchable text. While I created a spreadsheet of every person mentioned dates, connections, comments, and started drawing lines between them. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was tracking. Daniel didn't notice the shift at first. Why would he? He was used to me being pleasant, accommodating, soft-spoken. He'd never met the version of me that took betrayal and turned it into fuel. But that version was wide awake now. I booked an appointment with a divorce attorney just to talk. Just to understand my options. I didn't want to leave yet. I didn't even know if I could. But knowledge, I realized, was power. And I had been starved of it for too long. The attorney Harper Chen, recommended anonymously through a women's legal forum, was precise, non-judgmental, and terrifyingly efficient. She reviewed the digital files without flinching. "These aren't just violations of trust," she said, flipping through screenshots. "This is coordinated psychological manipulation. You could have a strong case if you wanted to." I nodded. I didn't say much. I was still collecting pieces. That week, I also visited my bank. Quietly, I requested detailed records of our joint accounts. Then, my own. I reviewed statements line by line, looking for patterns. And there they were. Small withdrawals Daniel had never mentioned. Payments to consulting firms I didn't recognize. One transfer labeled EM Advisory sent out 2 years ago. I stared at it for 10 minutes before realizing EM wasn't Evelyn Martin, his mother. It was Evelyn Mendez, a therapist. I dug deeper. Turns out Daniel had been attending solo therapy sessions during our 2nd year of marriage, never told me. And the therapist? Someone his mother had recommended. When I requested copies of the therapist's professional credentials, I learned she had been suspended in 2020 for boundary violations with clients. I filed that away. Another thread. Daniel noticed me less now. Or maybe he just assumed the silence meant we were doing better. That I'd finally let go of my stress, my distance. He smiled more, touched my arm more often, asked if I wanted to go away for the weekend, something spontaneous. "Let's reset," he said. I agreed. Not because I wanted a reset, but because a weekend away would give me access to his phone while he was in the shower, to his laptop while he stepped out for coffee. He didn't see it coming. He didn't see me anymore. Not the real me. The version of me who was done asking for answers and had started collecting evidence instead. On the 2nd night of the trip, I waited until he fell asleep. Then I opened his messages, not the app he used daily, but the encrypted one I knew about from the flash drive. He'd never logged out. Inside were messages from his mother, old ones. Some from Nora. Some even from my sister. That last one nearly broke me. My sister. The one I thought had grown distant because of life, children, stress. Instead, I saw this. "I don't want to take sides, Evelyn, but you asked if I ever thought Emily was manipulative. I don't. I just think she doesn't let people in anymore." Evelyn had replied, "That's all I needed to know. Thank you." I stared at that thread until the screen blurred. Then I screen captured it, saved it, tucked it into my growing heart. By the time we returned home, I had everything I needed. I still didn't know what I wanted to do with it. Not yet. But for the first time in years, I was seeing clearly. Daniel looked at me across the dinner table late Sunday, a fork halfway to his mouth. "You've been quiet lately," he said, and then his gaze. "Just thinking. About what?" I smiled. "About what comes next." He smiled. "Yeah, me too." And just like that, we were having 2 completely different conversations. I woke up that morning with a weight on my chest I hadn't felt before, a mix of exhaustion, resolve, and a strange sort of peace. The sun filtered through the curtains, but the light felt cold, distant, as if it knew what I was about to do and wasn't ready to shine on it. Daniel was still asleep, the steady rhythm of his breathing filling the quiet house. I watched him for a moment, the man I loved and the man I barely recognized all at once. The years of secrets, silences, and carefully curated facades had built a wall between us, thick, cold, and unyielding. I didn't wake him. I didn't say goodbye. Instead, I moved like a shadow through the rooms I once called home. I packed a small bag, clothes, my laptop, a few personal things carefully but without hesitation. This wasn't a hurried escape. It was a deliberate departure. Before leaving, I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not an angry letter, not a pleading letter. Just the truth. I told him about the diary, the folder, the recordings, about the people I thought I could trust who had betrayed me, about the choices I'd made to protect myself, even when it meant walking away. I didn't know if he would ever read it. I didn't know if it would change anything. But I needed to say it anyway. I slipped the letter under his pillow. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I turned off my phone, closed my email, and left the house without looking back. Outside, the air was crisp, the world unchanged. But for me, everything had shifted. I called a close friend who had always been my anchor and told her where I was. We met for coffee, and for the first time in a long time I felt heard. Not judged, not pitied, just understood. I spent the next few days away from the house, away from Daniel, away from the life I'd known. The silence was loud, but it was healing. I began to see myself not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her story. When I finally returned, it wasn't to pick up where I left off. It was to decide what came next. A few days after I walked away, Daniel showed up at my friend's apartment, the only place I had a semblance of peace. He looked tired, worn down, but there was also something desperate in his eyes. He didn't come with anger or accusations. Instead, he came with apologies. Words spilled out fast, like he was trying to fit a lifetime of regrets into a single conversation. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he said, voice cracking. "I thought I was protecting you, protecting us." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The man who had been caught between loyalty to his mother and love for his wife. The man who had lied by omission, who had let manipulation play out in silence. "I didn't ask for protection," I said quietly. "I asked for honesty." He swallowed hard, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's complicated. You know that. I thought if I shielded you, things would be easier, that the past wouldn't affect our future. But it did," I replied, "because it's not just the past. It's every moment since, every secret, every withheld truth." He nodded, tears brimming. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that beneath all the deception, there was still the man I married. But apologies don't erase years of carefully woven control. They don't undo the scars left by those who watched from the shadows. "I need time," I told him, "to heal, to decide if there's anything left to save." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't make this harder than it is," I said. "I'm done being a character in someone else's story." He left that day without another word. And though the silence that followed was heavy, it was honest. For the first time, the story was mine to tell. The day we finally talked, really talked, was nothing like I imagined. No dramatic confrontations, no raised voices, just a quiet room filled with years of unspoken words. Daniel came over one afternoon, tentative but resolute. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one where so many memories had been made and unmade. "I want to understand," he began. "I want to hear it all from your side." I took a deep breath. The truth was heavy, but I was ready. More ready than I'd ever been. I told him about the diary, the folder, the manipulation, about the people who had turned against me, and how I had fought back silently. I told him about the betrayals that weren't just his mother's doing, but also the silence he had kept. He listened, not defensively, but with a rawness that caught me off guard. When I finished, he looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was so scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of making it worse." I nodded. But closure isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's loud inside. Sometimes it's the silence between us that shouts the loudest. We talked for hours. About trust, about forgiveness, about the future, about whether we even existed anymore, or if we were two strangers holding onto a past that no longer fit. There was no neat resolution, no sudden epiphany. But there was honesty. And in that honesty, a kind of peace. I left that day knowing that sometimes closure isn't a door slammed shut, but a window opened wide. And sometimes it's the courage to walk through it alone. The morning after our last conversation, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't known in years. The weight on my chest was lighter, and the fog inside my mind had begun to lift. For so long, I had defined myself through others: the daughter-in-law, the wife, the obedient partner who kept the peace. But now I realized that I had forgotten the most important person in the equation: me. I didn't know what the future held, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that uncertainty. Instead, I embraced it. I started making plans not for anyone else, but for myself. I enrolled in that art class I'd always wanted to take. I reconnected with friends I drifted from. I even began therapy to untangle the threads of what had happened, to understand my own story better. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic transformation, just small, steady steps toward reclaiming my life. I kept the diary, not as a weapon or a reminder of betrayal, but as a testament to my journey, a record of the shadows I walked through to find my own light. Sometimes I read the last line again. If you are reading this, perhaps I have failed. Maybe she had. Maybe her control, her manipulation, her secrets, they hadn't broken me. They had made me stronger. And for the first time in a long time, my future plan included me. Not as a reflection of someone else's expectations, but as my own. And that made all the difference.